Hey, welcome back into the Wells Tech Garage. Thank you for being here tonight, everyone, for episode number 3 of our little mini-series where we're working on this 07 4Runner behind me. If you missed episodes 1 and 2, make sure to go back and check them out. In episode 1, we talked about the code that was setting in this thing, the P0016 bank 1 cam crank correlation. And episode 2, we talked about relative compression. We ran the test and found that bank 1 cylinders 1, 3, and 5 are all low on compression as compared to bank 2. So at that point, we're about 80 to 90% certain that our timing is jumped. Now tonight, we're going to be testing for a P0016 and we're going to be 100% certain that our timing is jumped. Now are we going to do this the easy way or the hard way? The work smarter, not harder. So we're going to go with the easy way. The hard way would be involving with pulling the valve covers off of both banks and monitoring and looking at the camshaft sprockets against the crank sprocket and make sure that they are in time where they're supposed to be. But if the computer's able to verify that electronically, why can't we? So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to scope both of our cam sensors and our crank sensor, and we're going to look for a pattern and see where those line up in correlation with each other. Now it's always good to know what your pattern is supposed to look like. We're going to be pulling up 3 sensors and they're going to have to line up in a certain way. So it's always good to know what it's supposed to look like. If you're already a member of IATN, that's great. If you're not, I highly recommend going out there and checking it out because IATN is a great resource for getting these known good cam and crank sensor signals. Otherwise, you're stuck with going out, maybe just doing a Google search or asking in a Facebook group or something like that. But your best bet is to be able to get a known good pattern of this before you even hook up the scope so that you know what you're looking for. Also, when we hook up our scope, by scoping our cam and crank sensors, we are able to watch for glitches in those sensors that could potentially be causing our problem. So we're going to watch for glitches and we're going to watch for how these sensors correlate with each other. All right, this is the image that is from Toyota. This is our bank 1 cam sensor and our bank 2 cam sensor and our crank sensor. So it looks like we have an AC signal generating crank sensor, probably a 2-wire, and then we have 2 digital Hall effect cam sensors, okay? So this is the way it's supposed to look. And that's all well and good, but it's kind of hard to tell exactly where this lines up. So this is what I do. I copy this image and we're going to go back to Paint and I'm going to throw this in here. I like using Paint. I think it just makes things easier and just a little bit more visual. So I'm going to crop this. Just grab this, crop it, and let's zoom in here. So I don't really need to see perfect clarity on this. All I want to do is I want to see where our cam sensor on bank 1 and bank 2 line up as compared to our cranks. So just like when we were doing relative compression, I'm going to grab just a straight line here. Try and get it straight. There we go. Off just a hair. There we go. I'm going to down this thing in size a little bit. All right. So let's start at the left side. So just looking at this, our cam sensors look like they line up right here. The line's perfect over there. Let's drop the size down on this again. There we go. Let's make this red so it's a little easier for you guys to see. There we go. So right there, our cam sensors are lined up. Not lined up, not lined up. There we go. Another spot where they line up. So there's multiple spots in this event here that is captured from Toyota. There's multiple spots in here where our cam sensors line up perfectly and they line up over our crankshaft. So this looks like 1 revolution because our crank is going to spin twice for a single cam revolution. So we have 1 revolution of the crank, 2 revolutions of the crank. So this is 1 full signal right here. So this mark that we're looking at right here is actually the same as this one. So what our goal here is we're going to be looking at these cam sensors and we're going to make sure that they line up just like this does on the laptop, okay? So here's our wiring diagram. We obviously are going to need this in order to hook up our cam sensors and our crank sensor. So it looks like our VVT sensor right hand, bank 1, VVT sensor left hand, bank 2. These are going to be our cam sensors, and again, just like I thought, 3-wire sensors. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to back probe at both of these sensors on pin 1. I'm going to grab. I'm thinking that VVT plus is probably going to be our signal. So I'm going to grab both of those on pin 1. And right here's our crank sensor. Looks like a 2-wire style sensor. And oh, we got a shielded wire here. So we don't want to go piercing this. And actually, when I was looking in service information for location of this crank sensor, you have to R&R the alternator to get to it. We're talking over an hour at least just to get to the crank sensor to back probe it. So instead of doing that, I'm actually going to go to the PCM because we don't have any other connection here. And I don't want to go splicing into this shielded wire. I don't want to pierce this shielded wire because this thing runs right next to the alternator. I don't want to induce any sort of voltage onto this wiring by accident. So I'm just going to go back to the PCM and go into pin 21 for the NE+, which should be our crank signal. So why don't we go ahead and get this all hooked up. So in order to get to our cam sensors, we are going to have to pull off part of this air box here. So I'll pull this hose off, mass airflow sensor, pull this hose restraint, or wiring harness restraint off. Let's go over here. Pull the air filter housing apart here. There we go. Set this off to the side. And it looks like we just got a couple bolts holding the rest of this on, and we'll be able to get to these cam sensors really easily. Sometimes on some engines you can get to the cam sensors even easier than this, but I just want to do this today. I could have had these back probed already, but I wanted to do this today to show you guys that this really doesn't take all that long. And if I had some power tools here, this thing would probably be already ripped off. Way faster than pulling off our valve cover for both banks. Oh. Alrighty. Alright, looks like we got a hose connected to the back side. I'm going to leave that attached. I'm just going to move this off to the side. And we can see our cam sensors are right here. We got one right here for bank 1. And one just underneath the throttle body here for bank 2. So according to my diagram, I want to back probe the red wire on bank 1 and the yellow wire on bank 2. So I'm going to very carefully back probe into our red wire here. And again, I'm back probing, not piercing. And I'm actually going to disconnect this to make it easier to get back probed. All right. There we go. So there's bank 1, and bank 2 was yellow. We got a coolant hose in the way here. But I should be able to feed this in. There we go. That should do it for the bank 2 sensor. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to hook up the scope leads to it right away. So I'm going to use the blue channel 1 for bank 1. It should keep that pretty easy. And I'll use red channel 2 or channel B for bank 2. So bank 2 on this motor is on the driver's side, bank 1 is on the passenger side. And if you're wondering about that, just like we went to that firing order out on our website from the relative compression class, bank 1 will always include cylinder 1, so you can see bank 1 passenger side, bank 2 driver's side. Okay, so they're both back probed. Let's go ahead and hook our grounds up right away so we don't forget about that. And now I do want to put all this back together really quickly because I don't want to have the mass airflow sensor disconnected. I want this thing running as well as it does all the other times. Go ahead and plug this hose in. There we go. I'm not going to put our wire restraints back because I will be taking this back off again. Put our air filter back on. Alright, so mass airflow is plugged in. Our hose on the back side is still plugged in. I'm not going to bother tightening any of this down because this is going to come off again. I just want a nice tight fit on everything. Alright, so we should be good to go. Cam sensors are hooked up. Now we got to hook up the crank sensor. And like I said, on this one I want to go to the PCM for the crank sensor because the sensor's buried and the PCM's much easier to get to. So why don't we head over to the passenger side of the vehicle, and our PCM in this one is located inside of the glove compartment. Alright, so I got my flashlight over here. Oh, look at this. Code reader in the glove compartment. This thing must have been setting a code for quite a long time. Alright, so glove compartment's loose now. We just got to pull off this little shock absorber on this side. And then this is a pretty easy one. It just pulls out. Some of these are going to have screws or bolts with them, but this one comes out pretty nicely. Grab our flashlight, and right here's our PCM. So kind of nice to get to. Nothing too serious to have to take apart to get to it, and it's way better than pulling that alternator out. So we need to get to pin, I believe it was pin 20. Let's double check on the wiring diagram. Pin 21 we're going to go on, the black wire on the PCM, and I already have found that this is on the middle connector in here. So right here, go ahead and I'm going to back probe into the black wire of the PCM. And hopefully you guys can see that. Go ahead and zoom you guys in a little. So right there's our PCM, and you can see my back probe is right there. Perfect. Let's get the scope lead hooked up, and we should be ready to rock. Okay. And I'm going to run our ground. I'll just run our ground to something under the hood. Just go out here. Okay, so that's hooked up inside the passenger compartment, inside the glove box. This is going to go to channel C, and I just have to hook up our ground. I'm going to go to just a bolt that's sitting under the hood here somewhere. Go right here, and let's hook up our other two leads. And if you guys are doing this at home, you're really only going to need to have wiring diagrams, service information so you can locate where your sensors are, back probes, and a lab scope. And your channels dependent on the scope are going to really, the channels for the scope are going to be dependent upon how many sensors you're testing. In this case, I have two cam sensors and one crank sensor, so I would need a 3-channel. But there's going to be some vehicles out there that are using 4 cam sensors and a crank sensor, or 2 crank sensors and 2 cam sensors, or 1 crank sensor, 1 cam sensor. But most vehicles you'll be able to get by with just using a 4-channel scope. Okay, let's open up the scope and get it all set up to go here. I'm going to go ahead and turn off this light. Alright, so channel A is already turned on. And we know channel A is going on our bank 1 cam sensor. And what do we need for voltage on this? Well, we know that this is a pulse width, not pulse width, this is a digital signal cam sensor, and according to our information here, this says 5 volts per division. Looks to me like we got a 5 volt cam sensor for both of these. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set these up. I'm actually going to go on 10, and then I'm going to run a double scale on this just in case this thing does go over 5 volts. So now we got 0 to 6 volts on channel A. Let's do the same thing with channel B over on our right side, 0 to 10 volts. Again, I'm going to run the scale times 2 and grab these both on the same line. So now cam sensor A and B, or bank 1 and bank 2, are both zeroed out on this line. Let's throw some labels in here. So channel A is camshaft. This is a Hall effect, and channel A is bank 1. Channel B is camshaft, again Hall effect, and this is bank 2. And then channel C is going to be an inductive style AC style sensor. Let's grab 20 volts there. This is crankshaft, inductive, and we should see an AC signal on this one. All right, so our 0 line for that's here. Let's move this down, go right about there. And we're at a 5 millisecond per division right now. I think I'm going to leave it there. We can tweak it as this thing is running. Okay, let's see what we got. Fire it up and see what happens here. Everything's out of the way. Make sure your scope leads aren't in the fan, because that would be a very bad day. Move this ratchet out of the way so it doesn't fall, and we should be ready to rock. Here we go. All right, I can see 2 cam signals, but it looks like I'm missing a crank signal. Verify my ground. And let's go take a peek if maybe the back probe fell out. All right, let's see what that looks like now. Hey, there we go, there's an AC signal. All right, so we have our signals up on the screen. Let's move this guy up a little bit. All right, that looks great. So we have our signals. Let's throw a trigger in here, kind of see if we can hold things in place. Okay, let's go ahead and stop it. But first, let's actually look at a little bit more time, so that way I have more I can zoom in on. So I'm going to stop it here. We've captured 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 crank revolutions. So that's 5 camshaft revolutions. Let's go ahead and stop it. Because remember, your crankshaft is always going to go twice as fast as the cams, or the cams are always going to go at half the speed of the crank. So if we want to see a full camshaft revolution, we need to look at 2 crankshaft revolutions. So why don't we start with this one right here. Let's grab these 2. So we'll go like this, and there is either side of a 2 crank revolutions or a single cam revolution. So we have 1 revolution, 2 revolutions. And look at this already. Right here. Right here. All right, let's look down the way a little bit here. Here again. And again. Zoom in on this. Look at this, guys, right here. Back this up again. Keep going. Right here. Right here. I don't see anything lining up right now. There's nothing layered on top of each other like it's supposed to. Remember, we went here. These are supposed to be layering. So as it crosses the missing tooth on the crankshaft wheel, it's supposed to line up with the cam sensors. So this must be the off one. So it would be this one right here. So as we cross the missing tooth right here on the crank wheel, our cam sensors should be lining up. Look at that. Now, just by a quick glance, I would say that our red signal is probably the accurate one. Red signal is bank 2, and it's right near the bottom of our crank signal here. And if we look at our graph over here, you can see that they're very, very close to the bottom right here of our crank signals where they line up, not over here where it is right now. See? It's over here. So bank 1 is off. Maybe a tooth or two, hard to say exactly. You could put the overlay in here and measure the degrees and everything, but that's just going to take more time. At this point, I'm now 100% certain that our timing on this engine is off. Bank 1's cam is out of position in comparison to where it's supposed to be. Okay, our correlation is off on the bank 1 camshaft. Bank 2 looks pretty good. So we either have a stretch chain, worn out tensioner, maybe some worn out guides, something like this. But at this point now, we can go up to the customer with a lot of knowledge to sell this job accurately, okay? In a few minutes today, looking at the cam and crank and both cam sensors and the crank sensor. Yesterday, looking at relative compression, and Monday, or the first day, looking at our code criteria. I mean, we're under an hour with all these classes. You can diagnose cam crank correlation codes under an hour and be 100% certain that when you sell the job to pull the front cover off, to pull the valve covers off, to do the work, you can be 100% certain now that this timing has jumped on here. So now we just need to ask a couple questions. Why did it do this? Why did it jump? Is our oiling okay? Is our filter okay? This might be where talking with the customer comes in handy. Have you changed your oil recently? Do you change it often? You know, that kind of thing. That is where pulling these mechanical components off your front cover and that kind of thing, you'll know more. But at this point, I would not hesitate to sell this job as a R&R timing chain, probably replace the tensioners because it's got 150,000 miles on it, and replace the guides, replace the chain, and inspect the camshaft phasers. Look for any sort of sludging inside of the engine and that kind of thing. And I would feel confident in selling that to the customer because now I'm 100% certain, looking at this, that bank 1 has moved, okay? So, you can go forward with that, but the question still remains of why does this happen intermittently? So, before I get into tearing this down, before we tear apart this engine and look at this thing internally, I want to go one step further and show you guys why this potentially happens intermittently and how this whole system works. So that's going to be tomorrow night. We're going to talk about AC signal generators and the AC to DC converter inside of the PCM and how this all works and how the computer exactly reads it. So make sure to join us back tomorrow night for the next class for episode 4 when we really figure out why this happens intermittently. And then from there, we're going to be tearing this thing apart. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.